gone in through the one that is in my diary. That is the one that's the host, is that?
I believe so, yes. And it says to open. Yeah.
So two participants already. Yeah, it's not asking me for it, though, so
that must
because
be
it's
right.
kept me, so it's kept me logged in. And I've got ability to screen share, so I think it must be the right one. And someone might be able to. Good morning. I'm just doing a sound check with the webinar for those who have already signed in early.
All good here.
Excellent. I can hear you, Lisa, so that's good. Just hoping it's all okay for everyone.
Yep, I can see you fine.
I should be online to hear that. So, Morning. We'll be just starting off in a few moments, but would like to welcome those who've joined us so far. I can see we've got people from right across the region, so great to see people from all over the Townsville, North West Queensland region. Good morning, Vereen. I've just seen your message. Just letting you know, we're on a webinar functionality rather than a meeting functionality on Zoom today. So I can't see or hear you, but I can certainly see your messages. Just checking in that you can hear and see me okay before I go into slide share mode this morning. So good morning, everyone. I've got the, hello, Vereen, I've just got your message. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning from RDA Townsville, North West Queensland. We're doing this on the fly, as you could tell, because the guidelines were only released barely not even 48 hours ago. So we've gone through those to make sure we're up to date with the information we can share with you today, and also so we can also give you some tips for getting ready for the applications. I know we've got applicants from right across the region today, and we are doing it on a webinar format, which means participants are on mute and I can't see you. But good morning, and right across our wonderful region. I will be regularly reviewing chat, so Verena asked the question there before, and you can all share questions. Certainly if you've got a question, just pop them in the chat box, and I will keep an eye on those to come back to you. I'll do my best to answer them in the course of the session this morning. We're fairly tight on time, so if I don't get to every question, I can follow up with you, because we will still be able to see the chat questions when we're finished, and we've got your contact details. So I'll do my best during the course of this. So once again, good morning and welcome. And I'd like to open and pay our respects to our traditional owners across our lands where we're meeting today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Here we are on Bulgarikaba and Middle People's Land in Townsville. Going forward, I'd just like to now do a share screen and move that over so you can have a look at the presentation pack, and we'll go through that now. I'm hoping that's a thumbs up that everyone can see that. Please let me know if you've got a trouble, but hopefully that's thumbs up and you can all see that. So it's a fairly full pack. We are going to just tidy it up and put it on our website later today, so other people can actually also go back and look at the presentation pack, and also go through the webinar, which we plan to host on our website as well for those who can't make it today. So kicking straight off, basically I'd like to introduce RDA and give you an insight into who we are, and then dive straight into the details. Of course, in anything we share with you today on the guidelines, The guidelines themselves trump anything I say. Hopefully we're giving you all the right advice, the best tips possible, but if in doubt, please refer to the guidelines. I also note overnight they've loaded up a lot of other documents besides the guidelines, so keep an eye on their website for additional information and templates and documents that come through right throughout this process. Most of you online I've already had the pleasure of meeting, but for those who I haven't, RDA is an Australian government initiative, and we were introduced by the government some 10, 11 years ago now. And in our RDA, we cover the Townsville Northwest Queensland region as one of 12 RDAs in Queensland, and of course 52 around Australia as mentioned on this slide. We work on a number of projects proactively, but also, of course, we work with the Australian government under the Charter, under our funding agreement. And this is our current charter. It slims down after the 1st of January, but it's really in the area of red, which is most relevant to us today in sharing information out about the Building Better Regions Fund. So the Building Better Regions Fund, why we're all here today, this is an initiative the government introduced several years ago, and over the last 7 years, over $1 billion has been committed to this program across regional Australia. It really is, as you can see there, it's about driving economies, it's about driving regional communities. And with those outcomes, in particular at the moment, of course, we all have a very strong focus on creating jobs. But all of those things listed there are important to the government and, of course, to us here locally. In terms of the government's process this year and this round, it is similar to last round in most ways. There are very few changes, but I will highlight those that have come through. Importantly, there are two streams of funding, one for infrastructure and one for community investments, and I will go into those in a little bit more depth. Vereen, so I think Jonathan's asked a question. Can we share a copy of the presentation? Absolutely, that will come up onto our website afterwards. So moving along, the two streams that are there basically still have common eligibility. So for eligibility, it really is important to cover off on these. In principle, you have an ABN, you're an incorporated not-for-profit, or you're a local government entity, and there's a few descriptions around that, or you're a non-distributing cooperative. So it's fairly basic in terms of who can apply. And also, of course, who cannot apply is basically anyone outside that. In particular, the government does note these organisations cannot apply in their own right. But one important point I'd like to stress here is these organisations could be partners or supporters of a project with a lead applicant who's eligible. So if a not-for-profit or a local government, for example, has a project, they can invite other partners to get involved, either financially or with in-kind support. So that's a really important element there. Next along, in going through the infrastructure project stream, it's important to note that you can apply for $20,000 up to $10 million. And the ratio of your co-contribution varies depending on where you are. So for example, if you're in a regional area like Townsville and near Townsville, you have to contribute up to contribute 50% or more. In fact, if you're in a rural and remote area though, you can apply for 75% funding, which means you contribute 25% or more. So there's a distinct weighting between remote and very remote, able to ask for 75% of project funds, where in coastal regional areas like Townsville, 50%. Now, I will go further detail into exceptional circumstances. You can ask for an exemption, but not in advance. You must submit your full application and apply for that grant, that exception to the contribution requirements. The other key thing about infrastructure project stream is they need to be projects that are ready to be executed, start operationalising within 12 weeks of getting the grant. So for example, the grant process will take about 6 months. You'll go through an agreement process. I'll explain that later as well. But you really need to be starting construction within 12 weeks of the grant execution. So that's what the government calls relatively shovel ready in terms of what they require in the scope of your project's development. Projects must be completed by 31 December 2023. So there's some good lead time there. You don't have to panic about impending wet seasons. So in terms of infrastructure projects, I think simply put, it's really about building something new or upgrading or expanding an existing facility or replacing an existing facility, but where it shows significant extra benefit. In fact, in all cases, you have to be able to demonstrate a very strong case for why your infrastructure expenditure will give more on return. So governments don't want to spend $1 million and know that there's less than $1 million of benefit coming back to the community. It's really about investing to create good outcomes. It's also important to note that you cannot spend any money prior to getting your grant agreement signed off. So anything you've done in the prior lead up to develop your project is not eligible for reimbursement later. And of course, in the government agreement, there's very specific advice about what you can and can't do with your funding. And that's also noted in the appendices as well. So for example, in the, on the other side of the streams, the community investment stream, that's a smaller stream. It's really based on doing activities in your local and regional areas. So for example, you can apply there for a project fund of you can apply for $5,000 or a maximum of $1 million. Projects there, a really good point to note, and a lot of organisations have taken great benefit from this in recent rounds. You can apply for up to $20,000 without co-funding. So if you've got a planning, regional strategic planning process you want to go through, you can apply for up to $20,000 without any cash contribution. Also there you can use the ratios above the $20,000, then the ratios kick in as mentioned before about whether you're classified as regional or remote or very remote. Just a quick note there, even if you've got a small infrastructure project, it would still need to go through the infrastructure stream. Now, one of the key things with this year's round and going forward is that tourism is a major change to the previous years in its emphasis. So last round, many of you will recall there was an emphasis on droughts this time, and it's recovery. This time there's an emphasis on tourism recovery. So $100 million of the total $200 million BBRF funding round will be allocated to tourism infrastructure projects. Tourism infrastructure. The remaining $100 million will be committed to other infrastructure projects and the investment stream. So that's a major significant difference from last round to this round. So just going through into community investment stream eligible activities, they really are about events, strategic planning or regional leadership, and you can see some good words there that reflect the guidelines. Importantly, also to note what cannot be included in this area. So if you're just going to continue an event as is, another annual event, that would not be considered eligible. You have to do something bigger, better, expanded significantly to be worthy of new funding. Likewise with planning, it's not about business case development or land use planning, other council functions and so on. It's really about new strategic planning. It could be strategic economic development planning, tourism development planning and so on. Leadership very much is focused on leadership in the community and not just for the individual. It's not for your internal training or particular courses and so on like you can see here. But there is still a lot of scope under the community stream to come up with great ideas for your projects and your communities. So further information about the BBRF eligibility, I've mentioned a few times about the mapping of where you are located. So regional, whether you're remote or very remote. If you know you already have a remote or very remote category address based on ABS data, then you can apply that. But it's important to note in your application, you'll be asked to put in a very specific address using a mapping tool so it clearly defines your eligibility in terms of where your project is and what your funding ratio is. Now, we don't have to worry about anyone not being eligible by their location. That's really a point relevant for capital city people, such as Brisbane and so on. All of our region is an eligible region for a project location, but the important thing is for the clarity of the remoteness will dictate your co-funding requirements. So getting that right is important. And so on the BBRF website, you'll see a link to a mapping tool, and that will help you get that determination that you can then subsequently ensure is in your application. So this is an example of what it will look like for our region. The one thing that I stress and that is important to check is not based on local government areas, it's actually based on your physical address of where your project will take place. So it could vary possibly from one part of a shire to another. So we just always stress not the LGA area, go down to your very address of where your project will take place. If you're doing a project across multiple areas, the good news for you is if at least one of your areas of delivery is in a remote or very remote area, the remote categorisation, that lower co-funding requirement applies. So you only will need 25% co-funding if you actually have remote delivery, and that applies into your whole project. So that's a really good plus for encouraging that broader spread of projects. Okay, so contribution in BBRF terms is explicitly defined as cash. So you must have cash for cash in your makeup. In-kind is always recognised, but it doesn't count towards your in-kind contribution does not count towards your cash. So your cash is king, but your in-kind can help strengthen your application to show what other partners you have, but it won't end up on the balance sheet of this contribution. Now, as mentioned, there are the ratios. The other important point that I'd like to make here too is your cash can come from not only yourself, but any other partners you might have. So in particular, if I call out for local governments, you might possibly have be working with the state government on a project. And if the state government can contribute cash, that can count towards your co-contribution. So the cash doesn't have to come from your bank account. It could be your loan or it could be your bank account. But importantly, it could also come from any of your partners to make up that required amount. So the exceptional circumstances are applied this year as well as they have been in previous years. I don't have the figure of how many actually have received this exemption in the past, but I can say it is very, very few. And we know that the government knows that everyone is doing it tough after COVID, after drought, after floods, and there'll be a lot of organisations out there that will be interested in this. But the advice to us is that very few will actually be recognised to be able to get this exceptional circumstances exemption from co-funding. So a couple of tips here. If you are going to apply for this, you have to still do the full application and make your case for exceptional circumstances in your application. And you really need to demonstrate strong advice, strong evidence of why you would be eligible for that and why they should consider you for that. So you will need to show your revenue impacts, other impacts on your community or your organisation of why this would apply to you. As the applicant, it really is first and foremost, why can't you put in the co-contribution or your partners? Secondly, then you could maybe talk about the broader impact of what your community is going through as well. So it is a tough one. You cannot get a decision. You must put in the full application. And if you are then successful with the exceptional circumstances, you will proceed through to the other eligibility checks and also the assessment of the criteria. So that's a really important one. One other point I'd like to make is there's an option there for you to say you can't meet the co-funding requirements, but rather than asking for a 100% exemption, let's say you're in a coastal area and you have to put up 50% of your contribution, but your not-for-profit has suffered a severe downturn in income because of COVID. You could make that declaration, you could plead your case for exceptional circumstance, and maybe you could say, look, you can't meet the 50%, but you can make 25 or 30% of the co-contribution. So still some contribution is still going to make a louder stronger case for you than asking for 100% exemption. But of course you can make that, but you've got to make a very strong case. So in terms of the criteria, these are the same as the last rounds, and actually I believe they're the same point allocation as well. So it's about economic benefits, social benefits, your capacity as an organisation to deliver the project, and the impact of funding. In other words, the importance of the funding to help you get going. So I'll just spend a little bit of time on these now and race through these. These are all, of course, in the guidelines. But economics is really about making the case these days very much about creating jobs, either direct jobs or how it will create indirect jobs through construction of your project, if it's a infrastructure project, or through delivery of an event or other activity through the community stream. And then importantly, what is going to be the longer term impact beyond that construction or activity completing? Now that's sometimes not as easy to assess as one would like. It can be rather complex, but it's a really important part of this whole process. Overnight, we've been chasing, with Lisa's help from our team, we've been chasing down what the government talked about in terms of some other fact sheets to help people with understanding what is required in terms of employment outcomes or cost-benefit analysis to help with giving the facts and figures and evidence base to back up your application. So overnight, the government on the Building Better Regions Fund has loaded up a fact sheet about employment outcomes. That's been released overnight to dive into what that might look like. And also for projects that are seeking $1 million or more in the infrastructure stream into cost-benefit analysis. Once again, there's a fact sheet up on that overnight now to help you with that information. That is really important. Other economic opportunities, though, of course, can be about catalysing new industry, new value-add opportunities in your region, addressing saving an industry or completely developing a new industry. There are a lot of different opportunities there to think about. It can also be about developing your supply chain so that they're more efficient, more productive, more cost competitive. So there's quite a broad range there, but of course in COVID times, jobs will be an important element, but so are those other elements to your answers. In terms of social benefit, there are a number of points here. So it's really quite broad, and these are just some examples, but for a lot of our rural and remote communities, it's about attracting and retaining population and workers, making your community a great place to live. They already are, but how can you make it even better and attractive to people? So it might be about community infrastructure that's great for families. It might be about infrastructure that will help with your community cohesion, bringing community together for events. It might be about how you bring people together through volunteering and so on. So there's a number of areas there that you can think about. And I think it's really important to note that, this is also 15 points, so it is an equally strong, important criterion with the economics. Sometimes, of course, there'll be a bit of crossover between the two. For example, if you talk in a region about unemployment, it is an economic issue, but it can also be a social issue. If it's leading, for example, in our case, in some parts of our region, to youth crime because kids don't have jobs, then it becomes a social issue. So we understand there's a bit of crossover there between those two, and in your answers you can refer to that. Right, so criterion 3 is similar to last year, as I mentioned, about capacity, capability and resources. Now, this is where you can demonstrate your track record in the past of delivering projects to give the government confidence. So this is about saying to the government, trust us, we can deliver this project, we'll deliver it on time, on budget, and we'll get the outcomes that we've promised. So that's what you want to instill through this answer to this criterion. So your track record in delivering similar projects is a really big plus and a tick. The ability to say that you've got everything well planned, ready to go is important, and that you can demonstrate that you've got strong processes in place and governance and processes and plans around what you're going to do. That's all very important. One tip, and I'll come into some tips later as well, but remember, if you don't have some of this capacity or capability existing in your organisation, for example, if you're a small not-for-profit, think about how you might be able to get a working group or a steering committee together so you've got those skills in the people you pull together to guide your project. That's one very quick way to make sure you bring in the skills. In terms of the infrastructure stream, it really is also very much about also understanding that readiness to proceed with your project. So governments, as they say in the guidelines, are unlikely to fund something that's very early planning or concept stage, very unlikely to be competitive. There are always far more applications than spots for BBRF funding, so they have the opportunity to pick the cream of all the projects. So the ones that they will focus in on are those that are well planned and ready to go. So if you've actually got your designs completed, your costings completed, your approvals are in place, if you need a development approval, for example, you've got everything ready to go to tender basically to start the project, you are very much well through this process and very well prepared to write a great answer for this question and criterion. There is some wriggle room in all of that to demonstrate that things are well in play, but you need to be able to demonstrate and give the government confidence that if you're successful, you can get started on the project pretty quickly after you've actually signed off on that contract. If they think it's just still a process and it's very rough and sketchy, you won't proceed with your project through that process. Really important to have it well developed. Last but not least, it's another 5 points, is also demonstrating the importance of the funding. Simply put, if the government knows that this project could get funding from another source and it's cost shifting, it will go ahead anyway, that won't score well, and they'll see through answers there if that's the case. It's important to demonstrate that your project needs this funding to get going, or otherwise maybe say, well, this project could get going maybe in 5 or 10 years, but we've got the need and opportunity now to move that project forward, start creating benefits sooner if we can get the funding sooner. So this is where you make the case to say, we need the money, we can get going now and deliver those outcomes. And this BBRF is critical to that process. Okay, so keeping moving along, I'm conscious that we're at a tight turnaround today. So with the, if you're ready to apply, there are some key things to remember here. It is an online application process, so make sure you go in well in advance to make sure you're registered online, you have your application there started, and you can go in and out of it to load up information. You can save and go in and out to update, to add information over time. It's important if you're having a technical issue though to call the contact centre on that number 13 28 46. The other key point about the applications, of course, is that they are opening on the 12th of January. This is extremely unusual this year to actually get the guidelines in advance of the opening date. So that's a real plus. And it's an extremely long process through till the 5th of March for closing. So while we're getting this just on the eve of Christmas, this is the longest time in BBRF history between guidelines opening and through to closing date. So I think that's really good so that people can prepare well. Of course, we always say projects, but it should be ready to go when a funding round comes up. But you've still got plenty of time to pull those pieces together. And for all of us in Queensland, the important tip is it closes 5 p.m. daylight saving time. So that means 4 p.m. Queensland time on the 5th of March. So please remember that if you're going through to an application. Now, when you're planning your project and also making your submission, one of the things to really consider here is the timelines. Now, this is from the guidelines about how long to think about from the assessment process. So if you work backwards from there, basically you have until the 5th of March to get it in. It's going to be roughly a 6-month process before you can start your project. So I would suggest if you've got a project and you're talking about timelines and starting your project, you suggest that you start your project in that sort of September, October period this year. If you actually suggest you're going to start it any earlier, you're putting yourself at the risk that they say, oh, well, look, you won't get the funding by then, so, you know, can they do the project later? Maybe not. So you need to allow for that. So the process is, of course, the application, the assessment with the department on eligibility. They help with some initial assessment of the criteria and make recommendations. They go through to the ministerial panel chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. McCormack. Then there's a process there of making the final decisions. Then the department announces and advises successful applicants. Then there's a process of up to 5 weeks of locking in the grant agreement. I think in the agreement it says you've got up to 8 weeks. On average, it'll take, say, maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks to get a grant agreement signed. So that's a process in itself. You've got to set your milestones for your projects, when you're going to get paid and so on. So when you think about all of that and the fact that you've got to get going within 12 weeks if it's a construction project, then you've got to allow for that in your timelines. So think about that. Also, of course, while the construction is to be completed by the end of 23, it's through till 30 June 24 is for the wrap up of the final report and acquittals of your grant. So there's still some room after the construction deadline and or event community stream activity deadline. So just keep those dates in mind. Other things to look out for, amongst other things, are really some rules around building codes, workplace health and safety schemes. So those who are familiar with construction projects will know that, of course, there's a lot of compliance around construction and procurement, but there are some special rules around projects should you be seeking and securing Australian government money. So please have a close look at those in the guidelines. The other thing is about maintaining your project. So a smaller project, you've got to demonstrate in your application you can sustain, maintain that infrastructure project for a year, and the figures and the years go up as the dollar amount goes up. So if you've got a project that you're asking for 1 million or more, you've got to demonstrate that you can sustain, maintain that facility over the next 5 years. And importantly, if you're asking for a cash exemption to the projects, then it's 5 years as well, regardless of the amount of funding you're actually asking for. You can also see there the differentiation between the advice you need to provide regarding your employment outcomes. I noted that fact sheet before. Under $1 million, you can provide a statement of evidence. That could be your own evidence base. You might consult with an expert economist on that, but you need to provide evidence. But once you go over $1 million and over, you need to provide a full cost-benefit analysis. And for that, we recommend, unless you've got an economist in-house, that you actually use the services of an economist to help you with that. That will help you have a more robust third-party report. In the attachments, there are many attachments required, and we'd certainly suggest you look at the table of those of what you would require for your grant. And of course, there's information in the guidelines about the grant agreements themselves. So there's a lot of detail there to still be read. I recommend going through with a highlight pen, picking out everything you need to think about. And this is just a tip also from the guidelines. You know, there are the criterion, but here's some wording around what the government will also look at when it comes to the final decision making. If they're saying, look, we've got some that are equally scoring, they're humming and hawing between who will be successful or not, if there are some that are very closely ranked. These are the other final decision points that the Minister and panel may consider in making that very final decision on successful applications. Right, so I'm now going to move into some quick tips about helping you get your answers to your criteria and your project going. But before that, I'm just going to share this one slide with you. Many of you might already use Gantt charts in your organisations, but because it's a process that can involve several people putting together an application, we suggest you put something like this together if you've got a team of people working on it. For most of you, I hope you do have a team, but because it's a big job on your own. But if you need information or data from someone else in another department, somewhere else on the team, it really would be helpful to you to put something like this together so you can stick to your deadlines and can meet that application deadline. We find that works very well for a project like this, such as an application process. Right. So I've talked about the economic benefit, and you've already seen some of this from the slide of what the criterion says. But I'm going to move over to some of the sources of data you might want to look at that could help you in putting together your case. So these are some of the types of problems or opportunities you might say you're addressing in your answer. And it can be, as I said, it could be a long-term unemployment problem, a youth unemployment problem, or it could be some other sector of unemployment, or it could be about capturing new economic development opportunities, new industry, new supply chain opportunities, new value-add opportunities. For example, expanding tourism, which is a major theme this year. So in terms of that, we always recommend in the beginning of your answer to this criterion that you paint the picture of what your challenge or opportunity is and put some numbers and figures around that to state your case rather than broad sweeping statements. So in dot point 2 there, you can see some of the sources of data you can refer to that will actually maybe help you with getting to those facts and stats. So those of you who are looking at tourism projects, given it's such a big topic this year, you know, Tourism Australia, Tourism Events Queensland will definitely have good data sources for you there. that you can talk about, you know, the size of the market share you have. You can talk about what you want to grow it to, why you could grow it to that, and what would help you. There are reports there on drive market or other areas of infrastructure and tourism marketing that might help you understand the opportunity and paint that picture in your answer. So a lot of different sources there. That's just a few, of course. Google.com is going to be one of your best allies in scanning and searching for data as well. I do love the QGSO website. It's free. You can go in there, run a regional report, and within a minute or two, it spits it all out in a beautiful format. So a tip, if you haven't used that one, it's a really good one to use in any organisation. We at RDA use it all the time and actually put it up on our website very regularly for an update for everyone. If you are actually getting stuck for reports that you can reference to make your case and also back up around thinking about job numbers, we also recommend you could look at other projects around Australia that might have done something similar to see if you've got a report or an in with someone at another or similar organisation that might say they're happy to share their project findings with you and their outcomes, because some of the things you might be putting up might have been done successfully elsewhere, or you can learn from somewhere else where they say it could be done better. Also, you can, of course, look for other reports in government, lots of government departments. If I'm thinking about agricultural expansion projects, there is a plethora of reports from not only the Department of Agriculture at the state level, the federal level, the CRC for Northern Australia has a lot of great ag projects and publications too. If, however, you get totally stuck and you're really finding it hard to put some numbers and figures around the challenge or the opportunity, you can always run a local survey as well. Use something like SurveyMonkey as a tool to help you put some questions out there and help build some local evidence based on feedback from your community. Once again, you can sort of quote that in your answer. In terms of the answer to, I think it's really important to talk about what are you going to do in the project, but what you've got to really focus on those outcomes. And often it's much easier to talk about what are you going to do, what are you going to deliver, we're going to develop a new tourism infrastructure facility that will service tourism and art gallery and community facilities all in one. That's the easy part to talk about what you're going to do, what you're going to build, or what event you're going to hold. I think the really big important part about answering the criteria is focusing on the so what, as I call it. What are the outcomes that you're going to achieve? And that's when we talk about, well, are we going to get more people into jobs through the construction process? Will there be apprentices? Are there opportunities for local procurement through local companies, Indigenous employment, Indigenous businesses as well? Are there opportunities then to link it with other benefits? So I think keeping that focus on outcomes and the so what, as I call it, is really important. So this is going on to those benefits in more detail. So these are some of my sort of questions that I've come up with you might want to think about. They may or may not be relevant to your project, but I suspect a fair few will be. So this is just a prompt from me to help you with thinking through those benefits. And as I said, we'll share these slides after the presentation on our website. Social benefit, we saw this slide earlier in terms of what are the types of areas that could be considered social benefit. In terms of data building, I mean, some of them might be the same as what we used in the economic case, but also there are a lot of organisations out there, probably far too many to list, that actually will have their own reports on social research. So, for example, ACOS, the Australian Council of Social Service, they run reports. They're a major peak body for the social services sector, and they speak up for social services issues. They do a lot of reports on social sector issues, needs and opportunities as well. National Disability Services runs reports, and you could tap into information there. So the other one I picked up is, of course, the benefits of volunteering. Volunteering is a way to get more activity in your community where funds might be tight. Getting volunteers helps more things happen. It also helps with social inclusion, bringing people together. I know that Sydney Uni has done a research on the benefits of volunteering. So Googling for your specific industry or your specific organisation and project will help you possibly find some more relevant project reports or research that might help you back up your case and make your strong answer to this one. But because the social area is so broad, it's very hard to cover off on everything. But I think thinking about it broadly and doing some searches, we'll find some interesting reports for you. Of course, we have Volunteering North Queensland based out of Townsville servicing the region. They might possibly also have some information for you as well. Okay, so this is, in terms of the benefits, even for a community or community investment or an infrastructure project, talking about the social benefits in the way that they occur is once again about what are the benefits during that construction stage, and importantly, what are the benefits, or the event stage, what are the benefits afterwards. So think about it in those two-tiered approaches, during the operations of the project and then the after results. The governments will be very keen to see that the benefits continue for well into the future. If something's a one-off flash in the pan and it's only a one-off benefit, that's unlikely to be strong and successful. Through construction of the infrastructure sector, of course, you can see the project's benefits often because the project remains on the ground. You can see the building or infrastructure. That's a little bit easier to paint the picture of. This is a little bit harder when it comes to community stream projects where you're talking about an event. If you do it 1 year, how will it help in the future years, for example, or the plan? How will it be used to make sure there are benefits down the track? That means also it's sometimes a bit more challenging on the social benefits and how you can see those benefits rolling out for longer. So what I've done on the next slide is giving you some examples. Once again, just a bit of a brain dump from me on some of the questions you might ask yourself to answer this question, to be able to paint those social benefits. Right. So in terms of project delivery, that was Criterion 3. To be able to do that, excuse me, I'm going backwards. I mentioned before, one of the best tips for this is about being able to make sure you've got a track record and a team of people who can guide the project that have all the right skills. So if it's an infrastructure project, do you have people either internally who've managed a construction project, or people you can bring onto your working group, steering committee as volunteers that have come from a building background, especially if it's a civil project from civil industry background? Do you have people that might have relevant finance, legal, HR backgrounds, marketing backgrounds, whatever might be relevant to your project? Bring them into your project as a steering committee, and that will ensure that you can tick off this one strongly if you don't have all those skills internally. Councils tend to be in a very strong position here because even if the individual hasn't had the experience, they're new to council, you will have had a team of people there delivering things for decades. So you've always got a lot of projects you could draw upon, but it's important that you still make the case for that you don't leave the assessors wondering about your capacity and capability. Because remember, they will also have heard horror stories about people promising to deliver projects and haven't finished them on time, haven't finished them on budget, haven't delivered outcomes. So never presume they're going to think, of course you can do it. You need to make the case of why you can do it and deliver it well. So the other thing about the application process is also making sure value for money. So that very last criterion is about demonstrating that you need the money, you'll use it, you'll get great outcomes. But one of the key components of that is value for money proposition. Government always likes to see leveraging. Now, by that we mean if you're putting in money, you've got the co-contribution in cash already. Now, that's a really important starting point. But anything you can show that in your answer that demonstrates wider support for your project is a good thing. So, for example, if you've got a small project, the government wants to know it's not just good for one organisation, that the community will benefit, it'll be good for the local community, to be actually hopefully good for the wider region as well. So being able to demonstrate that value is really important here. So it's not just one benefit for one little sporting club, it actually will have a broader reach, for example, into your community. So that's where you can demonstrate, for example, you've got letters of support for your project, where you've got other in-kind support for your project and so on. So that's really good. And as I mentioned before, demonstrating the fact that without this funding, your project could not go ahead anytime soon. That's really important. Another tip with getting co-funding is you need to also demonstrate that through some signed forms. And there are templates now online to demonstrate either your own internal funding commitment with an accountant sign-off form or through another form that is used for your co-contributions if they're coming from other partners. That's really important. That's an eligibility requirement. If you don't have the attached forms demonstrating those co-contributions, you'll be ruled ineligible. So that's really important. Okay. Right, so just some other tips that are more general to making applications now. These really are not so much specific to the criteria per se, but just other tips about making a strong application. So any of you who've sat in on any of these before will know that I do make an emphasis on making sure the writing is as clear as possible. So the assessors, when they're reading through dozens, if not hundreds, there'll be hundreds of applications for BBRF. I suspect every person involved in this will read dozens of applications. So you want yours to stand out, be easy to read, easy to understand, easy to like. So put yourself in the shoes of the reader when you're writing it and making sure that you're thinking about then how easy it is. So tip number one here, do they know where you are and our distances? Now, most of our region is really hundreds of kilometres from another town or another airport or hospital, at least 100k, often 200-300k. So it's really important sometimes to paint the picture about those distances, how remote we are, and how that can make a difference to the value of your project, for example, or understanding why your project, if it's an infrastructure project or even an events project or community stream project, might be more expensive than other capital cities because it's more expensive to do business in rural and remote areas. One of the other key things there, if you've got small numbers, for example, creating another 5 jobs on top of 50, if you're a capital city person looking at applications, reading through applications, 5 jobs might not seem enough. But if you can say you can increase employment in a particular area by 10%, that actually makes a much bigger case. So I think sometimes our small numbers, in particular in rural and remote areas, can be a bit of a challenge. But use percentages where they make the scale of impact more noticeable and how important that is, because the scale of impact gives on the project gives an indication of the scale of impact in your community, of course. One of the other things is also mirror language. So when we're talking about economic impacts, we're talking about jobs, use that same language, especially in addressing criteria. So the reader goes, yep, they are addressing this criteria. They're talking about this very directly. Clear and concise language. You can write it in second, we are going to do this, we're going to do that, or you can use third-party language. In your case, company ABC will do this, or not-for-profit XYZ will do this or whatever. Really, it is up to your preference. Sometimes third party makes it easier to read, but not necessarily important in the scheme of things. It's just be consistent, though. If you start off and saying we and our, continue that style throughout the document rather than moving them to third party and swapping between second and third party language. In terms of acronyms, I suggest use them very sparingly. If it's one you're using all the time, spell it out up front, put it in brackets, and then use it constantly throughout. If it was us, if we said Townsville, Northwest Queensland, and we had to say that 100 times through a document, we might just say TNWQ in brackets and TNWQ for thereafter. However, if it's an acronym you're not going to use regularly, just spell the words or the phrase out in full each time, because the poor reader will not remember what it is if it's something they're not familiar with. Remember, they're reading lots of applications. Focus on the positives. You can always paint the picture of a negative up front. You're dealing with unemployment, a big challenge, the need for economic diversification, struggling with retaining population and trying not to have a further decline in population or ageing. These are the things you can paint the picture of, but in all your solutions, your responses, make it very positive. So the reader goes, yep, they've got some challenges, but these guys know what to do and they're going to get on with it and achieve something here. Budgets, we've seen examples in the past where mistakes have been made on budgets and it's actually cost organisations money in the end of the day. They get a grant and they come short with their own funding. So this is really, really important. Get your budgets right. If you can get an accountant or someone who's used to working with budgets, good with figures, to proofread your budget so that you don't have a shortfall and a problem later. Note in the application, there are several places where you can actually refer to attached materials, your evidence base, for example, and there are mandatory documents you must attach. So please remember to attach all the required documents. I suggest you use names for each of those documents that are clearly articulated and understandable what they are. I also suggest if they have documents that are required, for example, 2 documents required, you don't merge them into one if they specifically ask for 2 documents. They might think you've overlooked one and missed one. So, for example, if you need an evidence base for your cost-benefit analysis on your infrastructure project, and you also need to attach one of your plans, do them as 2 separate documents in the space they require them. The other thing is there are limits throughout the application form, and you can download a sample application form, but in the main they are actually character limits, not word limits, so always be aware of that, and so you can actually word check. Now, I know from my own experience it's often easy to write and ramble on, and it's actually harder to write short, concise and succinctly, so that's a real challenge sometimes, to say everything you need to say as tightly and concisely as possible in a meaningful way. So there's a challenge. Last on this slide, I would also suggest that you write your application in a Word document. You can even download that sample application form and possibly use that, because you can cut and paste from your application in Word into your final document. But if you actually keep online, so in your online application, so by doing that, you have everything together. You can have a master document, maybe that you can share with others who contribute into that document rather than having version control issues. And you can easily do your character count to monitor that in Word. And also you have a final version and a backup version. So if something happened and you freeze out online when you're doing your application, that would be the worst thing possible. So we recommend doing everything in Word, ready to cut and paste into your online application. I know many of you will already do this, but if you've got an application, we recommend getting an independent third party, someone who's not close to the project, to read it for you. If they're not familiar with it, they'll pick up things they don't understand that you might already be so close to you hadn't thought about explaining. So that's a really good tip. It might be someone in your own organisation, or if you can con a friend or a mate into it, that's a good thing to do. Do a grammar, spell check, check your acronyms, any jargon that might not be understood outside your organisation or sector, and just check all of that. Grammar and spelling can be a bit of a distraction if they're not right. There might be small things, but they are a distraction for the reader if they're actually trying to understand and like your application. So getting that right is really important. I've already mentioned the budget, double, triple check the budget, and all the required documents. I'm probably the worst at doing what I say on this one. I'm always working to deadlines and seem to be creeping up on us all the time and just scraping in. But when there are several hundred applications going in for a round like this, you can guarantee that the system might be slow on the last day, and you don't want to have a meltdown in your own system by any chance. Now, please, if possible, as I mentioned, start your application. As soon as application's open, start your online application process, register, have your application online, and then you can continually go in and out to update it. And then you won't have a final rush at the very end. So we really highly recommend that you try to finalise it at least a couple of days before the final deadline. We know that's hard to do, especially in small organisations, but the government will allow, potentially, if there's a problem with their own system, they might allow for late applications, but it's extremely rare. They can't allow for your problems on your computer or staffing or whatever. So if there's a natural disaster on a due date or around a due date, they've sometimes made exceptional circumstances for late applications, but only for those directly affected, not for everyone. And if your computer's the problem, they won't necessarily give you an extension. It would only be if their own system crashed that they would give everyone an extension. So don't rely on the ability to say, look, can you get an extra hour, an extra day? Because so many apply, it's unlikely they would give that. Okay, so close to the very end here. So basically the project proponents, all of you online or others who will be listening in later, we are following up on this obviously in the new year to see what else we can do to help you with preparing. But importantly, I just want to flag that the department will do a webinar on guidelines in January. Date to be confirmed, but as soon as we know that, we'll also put that out on our newsflash and social media so you know about it. Secondly, we're always open to talking with project proponents one-on-one. So from the 11th of January, and I would suggest till the 28th of February, given there's a closing date of 5th of March, we'll be happy to talk with you one-on-one about your project. From RDA, what we can do is give you advice about what you might want to think about your projects, who might be people you should be talking to as well to help make a stronger application, who might be useful people to get letters of support from. Might there be other people who could partner with you on the project? Of course, the sooner the better we do that in most cases. The other thing is if we get the responses early enough, we will provide we'll provide some feedback on those draft responses. So for example, I said to be advised there, but I would suggest that probably we're looking at something like around 15th of February, and we'll advise on the new year on this. But if we get something by the middle of February, we will be able to give advice on those criteria responses. We won't be going through your budgets or other answers, but we would be happy to look at maybe your project description as well. But the key area that will make a difference for you making a strong application, apart from meeting all the mandatory requirements, will be in those criteria areas, and we're very happy to provide advice there. Also, of course, we're happy to provide letters of support if we get enough information through to us, and also in time. So given that there could be a bit of a rush, we're suggesting any request for letters of support we receive with your draft application copy and importantly your answers to your criteria, so we can provide a letter of support in time, and so that you and ourselves don't have a last minute rush on that. Right, so finishing up, very happy to take any more questions through chat now, or otherwise follow up offline with you. Here are our details at our office. We've got Lisa as our executive assistant and running our office here, and those are Lisa's contact details. And certainly Lisa could provide some initial support and advice, and then line up a time for you to meet with myself or Erin to give you support with your project in regards to the advice we can provide. So we'd be delighted to help you there and do that. And I'm sure many of you will be breaking for Christmas and New Year like we will be. We finish up today, and we'll be back on the 11th, and look forward to working with you on your projects to say and help and as best as we can, so that our region gets some great results out of this round. To give you some confidence, over the last few years, probably the last 8 or so years, we've helped more than $100 million of projects be successful in various funding rounds like Building Better Regions Fund and predecessors and other grant rounds. So we've got a good track record in this region from lots of hard work by lots of people. So good luck with your applications. I can't see any other questions filing through at the moment. Given we're a webinar, it's sad I can't see your faces, but it's the best way to do it when there's a group of people online. But I hope that's been helpful to you. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And we certainly hope that you have everything you need for a starting point today. But as mentioned, if you go online to Building Better Regions Fund, you'll see a lot of information there, new forms that have been added overnight. And the other final thing there is that they will regularly update the FAQ based on the questions that come into them on a regular basis. So I would say have a look at that each week, because you'll probably pick up new things that will be of interest to you in further understanding the guidelines for the application process. So thank you from everyone at RDA. It's been great to talk with you today. Good luck with your process, and have a very, very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thank you.